Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. John and I are continuing our conversation on monster tactics. Today we're going to be talking about hags. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Welcome back, everyone, to Dungeon Brew. Today we are going to be talking about hags for our monster tactics videos. But before we get started, please make sure you do hit that subscribe button, hit the like on the video, and feel free to comment during the conversation and let us know your thoughts. John, why don't you get us started? Hags is kind of a wide net to throw because there's a lot that fall underneath that umbrella. Where would you like to begin?
Right. So hags are a lot like dragons, and I say that just in the sense that each type of hag has its own particular motivations and interests and things of that nature, to the point where we're going to try and talk about in general the way that hags behave tactically. But keep in mind that individual motivations for this type of creature will vary, and they also have unique personalities which will cause these things to vary. And this is more of just considerations for how do I approach this to make it interesting, to make it challenging, that type of thing.
Yeah, hags are hard to consider sometimes as monsters because they often serve as villains. And you're right in the sense that they're like intelligent in terms of having like their own means to an end of what they're trying to accomplish, and so it's probably easier to think about them in that way than just a typical run-of-the-mill monster that's popping up on the road and engaging your party in combat.
Right. Yeah, there's not going to be, you're traveling down the road and a hag ambushes you. That's not going to be a thing. They're not that interested in what's going on with you in particular. They have their own, usually larger schemes at work. Mm-hmm. And I've used hags a lot. You've played in in pretty much all the games I've run. I almost always have a hag appear at some point in my games because I actually like them a lot. I like their uniqueness. I like their intelligence. I like their malevolence, and I like their motivations because they make for very interesting villains. They make for very interesting monsters in general. Whereas sometimes with other ones, it's like, yeah, orcs are fun, and we've talked about the interesting things that orcs can do tactically to make them interesting for your party, but it's not quite the same thing. It's not the same feeling. So I'm going to talk very broadly, I think, about just a couple of things that I consider when I'm looking at them. I always have them tie into why it is that they're in the place that they're in, and why they're operating, what their motivations are, and that type of thing. This has to be something that you create uniquely. I've had them in there because they're trying to take control of a particular village because they want access to the children in the village. So in one of the games that you guys played in, they had basically taken control over most of the children in the village, and the first thing that happened when you got off the boat is one of the children came and gave you a cup of basically poison. Because the child was underneath the control of the hag, and the hag was doing what they could to eliminate all of the adults so that there were just children there for whatever malevolent schemes that she had. I've also had hags that have used or basically formed into covens, and they form in their covens in order to exercise greater power. And when they have a coven, there is kind of a love-hate relationship with the other members of the coven, and you guys have fought those covens before, and they're very powerful and they're very dangerous. It was actually something that I think that you guys were close to 20th level in order to be able to compete with at their level, type of a thing. Mm-hmm. So my point is that they have such a wide range of power and motivation and that type of thing that you really can't just pin them down and say, oh, well, this is the way that you handle them in any specific scenario.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I'm also a huge fan of them. I can't say I put them in every game that I play, but they are there frequently in regards to just introducing them to the players. Because like you, I enjoy the intrigue that a hag brings, and it's oftentimes tied into the bigger plot line, which is really fun to kind of play it in there, if they themselves are not the main schemer behind whatever the plot is that the adventurers are investigating to some level. I mean, I've had night hags that have been in the belly of Hell, as you guys have been walking through, I've had sea hags on the ship in the middle of our Norse campaign that you had to come across. I've had hags that have infiltrated your dreams and misled you, making you think that it was some sort of divine direction where she was actually leading you away from her lair so that you didn't have to go and engage her in combat. So I think that it's really fun to look at the different illusion magics and the fey creatures that they employ and the environments that they create and how you can twist those and manipulate those to fit the motivations of the hag to benefit them in the direction that they're going. They do make mistakes. It's not like they're not going to make mistakes, but every action they take usually has some sort of plausible motivation behind it in order to strengthen their position in some way. Right.
So I think probably the most common thing that you come across with a hag is that somebody goes to make deals with hags, right? This could be a player character that's going to seek a hag in order to be able to get something. This could be information. This is a great hook to get an interaction with the hags or hag that you have in your campaign. Many of the hags are willing to deal with mortals because they can get something from it, or in the case of like green hags, they just delight in trying to sow discord and strife within an individual's life. So they're going to make a deal with a mortal in order to try and like get them to be in more pain or cause some kind of harm to their personal life in a specific way. So they will do that. You can bring in the hags in those ways. Hags in general do have those motivations. So they're willing to deal with mortals in order to be able to do certain things. Green hags may seek out mortals in order to create those deals because, like I said, in particular, they enjoy doing that. Sea hags may seek out particularly attractive mortals because they like to destroy beauty. And so if they can do anything to destroy beauty and that type of thing, then they'll do it. But when it comes to the way that I think some general rules for hags that are probably true, they're intelligent, they always have an escape plan, they always have multiple escape plans, they almost always value their lives to the point where they're going to try and lie, deceive, cajole, do whatever it is that they can to escape a life-threatening situation, and they'll agree to almost anything in order to be able to do that. They almost always employ minions of some kind, and the minions should be specific to the type of hag. So if you have a Veer hag, for instance, they're going to have yetis and winter wolves and creatures that make their home in winter in one way, shape, or form, and they will employ them. So the Veer hag isn't going to ambush your party on the road, but its minions might. The yetis might. You might see a troop of yetis and winter wolves coming and ambush the party on the road because the Veer hag likes to see creatures freeze to death and encapsulated in ice, and so any creature that has that power, that capability, might do it. A powerful Veer hag, especially one that's part of a coven, may even actually have the employ of a white dragon. So you can have those combinations set in place where she is basically using these types of minions to exercise her power in a greater area. And other hags are going to have different ones. You mentioned Fae, so Quicklings are a good one. Red Caps are a good one for powerful Fae hags. And then when it comes to sea hags, sea creatures, kind of in the same vein. Anything that falls into that drowned dead. I'm trying to think here. You probably aren't going to probably see something like a dragon turtle, but other sharks, mermen, anything that they can get their hands on in order to try and exercise their power in a region.
My other thought with them, and this is probably why you're touching on this a little bit too, is that they typically always have a lair,
right,
or an environment that is populated with their allies to help protect it in some way, shape, or form, and they are particularly going to want to fight within their lair. So if they do find that there's going to be some sort of oncoming battle, if adventurers are pursuing them, they're going to try to draw you back into a place of theirs that is protected by their magic, and they have those lair actions that they can utilize in order to have the upper hand.
No, that's a very good point. There are some creatures that try to hide their lair, which the hags are going to try and hide it. Like, they don't want anybody just walking across it. But like you said, if push comes to shove and they're down for a big fight, they want to fight on their ground. This is home court advantage, and they want that. Other creatures are going to try and conceal their lair as best as possible because that's where they go to hide. That's where they go to keep themselves safe. Which, Baldur's Gate 3 is a great example of a green hag lair.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. There's a lot of the weird like explosion stuff that is Larian Studios, but in terms of like the illusion type thing, she's changing who she is. She makes herself look like the person you're trying to save. That kind of stuff is classic green hag, and it's great. If you're talking about a Veer hag, it's going to be more environmental. There's going to be the ice, there's going to be snow, there's going to be slick patches. There's going to be minions that are operating within their lairs that are going to help keep them safe, that type of thing.
I have to ask this, John. Night Hags still exist in 5e, right? It might be stuck in 3.5. Okay,
Yes.
You just haven't mentioned them much, and I love the Night Hags.
Well, I'll let you talk about Night Hags a lot. Night Hags are honestly one that I haven't used nearly as much as the other Hags because I tend to gravitate towards them. So, yeah, talk about Night Hags a little bit.
Well, the big thing with Night Hags is just really, I think, their ability to infiltrate nightmares, which is why I enjoy using them so much, is because they can be misleading and misdirecting in that way. And they also have this ability, of course, to... God, it's been a while, but they also have this illusory piece where they can change themselves.
Which I think theirs is an actual physical shape change versus the illusory of the green hag and the sea hag. So, whereas you might be able to see through a green hag's illusions with something, a true sight, for instance, a shape changed hag will look like and physically feel like the creature.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the reason I like Night Hags is probably because I like playing with undead a lot, which I know we're going to be doing some undead videos here.
Yeah.
But I like having their lairs in graveyards or in crypts or in areas like, not necessarily swamps. That's more, I guess, for your Fae type. But in areas where you can utilize those undead as their minions, which for me is just an epic fight every time. So.
Yeah, well, and I mean, they also, being fiends, which they're the only hag that is not a Fae type, they're actually a fiend type. So their connections with fiendish creatures are also going to play a lot into that. So you can employ various fiends as being parts of their minions as well, or they may have powerful alliances with more powerful fiends that they're able to call on or use in some way that help them in any of the combats that they engage in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say this, too. I think I'm probably more familiar with spells that Night Hags use a lot, like Ray of Enfeeblement. They're spells that I like to have as a GM in my bag of tricks to utilize. And so when you are playing a hag, just make sure you're familiar with what innate spellcasting abilities they have, because that is one of the things that makes them very unique. The hag you choose is going to have different innate spells than other hags.
Yeah, unless, and then there's the Coven, and Volos is very good about offering different Coven spells as well, where, if you have 3 hags together, they gain access to even more spell power, which is exciting as well.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of we should probably talk a little bit about their lairs somewhat, since this is most likely where DMs will also set up the engagement or players will be forced to pursue, and ideally, like I said, that's kind of where things are going to go. So the lairs, oftentimes, especially with the illusory style hags, they're probably going to have things that appear one way but are definitely another. And this can be as simple as the green hag setting up an illusory bridge that goes over a pit of spikes, and so the party doesn't think anything about it, and they try and walk on it, and there's no bridge there, and they just fall into the pit of spikes. That type of thing. These are going to be trapped to hell. They're going to have defenses in place. They're going to have things in place that are meant to incapacitate, kill, trap, or otherwise deal with any intruders before they reach the actual sanctum where the hag is intending to fight if push comes to shove. So... Go ahead.
I know I'm complimenting you here because you're really good at utilizing this, but for GMs that haven't utilized this often, it's important to remember that hags are old. That they have a lot of skill in defending, and they don't have a whole lot to do besides build those defenses first to protect the place. This is great opportunities for skill check challenges during the course of a hag's lair when they're moving into it. And I would use those randomly. One of the things that you do really well, John, is that you would just be like, beginning of the round, we always rolled some sort of check that you would kind of notate on the side that may not actually be dealing with what we're dealing with in that moment, but just so you know down the road if we're going to make that check or not for something else that we're going to be coming across within there. So it's like, you don't want your party to just approach a bridge and go, all right, everyone, roll your perception check.
Right.
Roll perception checks regularly to kind of map out what's coming down the road on the map. So some of those things can catch them off guard.
Yeah, that's almost like before we even enter into it, where I'm going to have everybody roll like, 2 or 3 D20 rolls like right off the start, so you can just notate them down, like you said, and then it's like, okay, we're up to the first one. This was everyone's roll. So and so, you noticed this or you interacted with this. Which, if you're doing 5e, there's also the passive option. I think the big thing with that, and for me personally, that's always been my frustration with just the passive perceptions and that type of thing, is it does eliminate some of that excitement when it comes down to something like that illusory bridge, because somebody has taken that random damn feat and they've got a passive 22 perception, and it's like, okay, well, waste of time. But the thing is that illusions in general should be something that are investigated rather than perceived, and I think that is something that it's important for GMs to realize, is that you have to investigate, and most of the time illusions take a round to investigate. So if your party is just going, oh, there's a bridge, and they just walk across it, no one has taken the time to investigate it, and so it does not matter. You don't necessarily need to use those rolls. You don't need to use passives. They have to investigate. That's part of the benefit there. Not to go on a tangent here.
No, that's a really good point. It's a really good point. All right, sorry to take you off. I was just going to say, remember your hags are intelligent, and they've had a lot of time to defend. And so it's not a willy-nilly thing. It should take several rounds to get through those defenses. It's not just, I'm going to walk into the door, and there's the hag in her lair.
Yeah, so, and different hags are going to handle this in different ways. Green hags, like I said, very much illusions, those types of things. A sea hag, most likely their lair is going to be located underwater. It's going to be difficult to access. No mortal is going to be able to swim there unless they have some ability to breathe underwater. So they would have to use magic to get to her. That is just Defense 101. You don't want people getting in there who don't belong in there. It's going to be difficult to navigate, and I use this with the Deep Dragon that you guys fought during one of the 2E campaigns that I ran, but the idea is that there's a narrow passage filled with, stalactites and stalagmites, and so it's difficult to parse through unless you're a creature that is very adept at swimming, and so there's the possibility of just taking physical damage while trying to navigate these narrow passages underwater that's got heavy tides and movement of the water and that type of thing.
Our wizard died.
Yeah. He didn't die. He just kind of died. He was partially dead. But those types of things, just consider those types of defenses, and then there's always going to be minions involved somewhere in the lair. There should also be some kind of like moral quandary, and that can be as simple as something like one of the hags has caused children to become like she's taken over the minds of some children, and they're presenting a physical threat to the party. What does the party do when they're faced with a bunch of 9 and 10-year-olds who are brandishing daggers and look like they're cannibals? What do you do in that situation? Create the moral quandaries, create things that are going to create pauses and prevent the party from trying to push forward through it, or have to come up with creative solutions in order to be able to resolve it. Maybe they've heard about a noble paladin who came and defeated her, or came to attack her, and instead they find that noble paladin, his mind has been taken from him and he's posing a physical threat. Do they try and save the paladin, or do they just go ahead and cut him down because he is no longer himself?
That's straight out of a game that I provided for you. Love it.
What is that? I don't remember.
We did that in the Norse campaign when you guys faced a hag. That's straight out of the...
Oh, fantastic. I don't remember. It was a good idea, apparently. But those are just things to kind of set up. These are the tactics that the hag employs in order to try and protect herself and protect her lair.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of anything else that I have specifically for them. Like, My last comment is just make sure you read through the hag abilities as you pick them, because there are so many. I know right now in one of my campaigns you guys are fighting Annis hags, and they're a whole different challenge. It's a whole different ball game when you approach them opposed to some of these other ones. And so it's just making sure you're going through the list and reading about the history of them and how to utilize them to make them feel imposing for the players. These are, for me, more than monsters. They're villains, and they very much have that that setup when they come onto the scene, is that this is not just your typical orc raiding party or goblin ambushing party. This is something unique and new that the party should see as being dangerous.
And the last thing that I'll mention is weird magic, which is something I very much like to employ with hags. Basically what weird magic is, and this is talked about a little bit in Volos, is the idea of they imbue objects with magic, and these objects basically become something like a scroll or a potion or whatever it is. But they will imbue an object with magic, and that gives them access to additional spells or additional abilities, and they're kind of like a once-a-day type situation, which are very useful to create a unique hag or a unique encounter. So something along the lines of, and I think this is an example in Volos, is like having a mirror that they will smash, and it creates something like a glitter dust effect, or it will create a stinking cloud effect, something along those lines. A spell that is not normally part of their repertoire, but it's one they have access to because it was something that they imbued with magic, with their weird magic. And you can also use that opportunity to create unique objects that are in there. And I think one of those was, at some point, one of your characters, Joshua, had a desiccated dwarven head that he used to wear at his belt that gave him dark vision. But he could only see through the eyes of the dwarf, so everything was at crotch level whenever he had he activated his dark vision, and then he could lift up the head and move it to be able to see in different directions, but he only could see through those eyes. Those types of things I think are fun and unique to include with your hags, that allow it to feel unique and give the player something at the end of the encounter to have as a memory.
Yep, I absolutely agree. I have nothing else to add to that. I do miss that dwarven head. Every now and then I use it as an improvised weapon in combat.
Swinging by the beard.
Swinging around a belt. Yeah. All right, so thank you guys so much for hanging out with us again here on Dungeon Brew. Again, hit that like and subscribe button, and we will see you all next week.
Dungeon